Is someone out of bed upstairs? Did I hear someone out of bed? You better get back into bed if you know what's good for you. Look, I don't care who started. You both better get back into bed if you know what's good for you. If I have to go upstairs now and put you back into bed, you're both going to be very, very sorry. If you haven't guessed by now, what we're going to be dealing with tonight is the subject of preventing Bedlam at bedtime. Now, this was actually a topic that was suggested by a listener who took advantage of our email address, which is set up by our very loyal and dedicated coordinator, Yitzhak Gross, which, by the way, is chinuchvaad123@gmail.com. And any listener who would like to could suggest a topic for us to address at a future Vaad. And this particular listener sent in the question, which we're going to talk about tonight, is how do you keep kids in bed after you put them to sleep without using glue? Now, the premise of that question actually is a little strange, because I don't know of any glue myself that you could use to keep kids in bed after you put them to sleep. Perhaps this listener could send in through the email address the brand of that particular glue, because to my knowledge there isn't any glue that's going to keep kids into bed when you try to put them to sleep, and that can be a very big problem, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, before we can answer that question in a practical way, there's two principles of chinuch that I want to introduce first as a kind of hakdama. The first comes from Reb Moshe Zatzal in Igros Moshe, in a tshuva in Orach Chaim, Chelik Daled, Siman Kuf Hey, number Gimel. And the question is as follows. B'davar lahalbish yolodim katanim. The question was sent to Reb Moshe, are you allowed to put on children, young children, kishedayin hu Shabbos, while it's still Shabbos, begodim sheyeshenim behem, pajamas, Lashon Zar. You put pajamas on kids, young children, on Shabbos, v'yadua shekodem Havdalah, and it's going to be before Havdalah, yelechel lishon. They're not going to go to sleep before Havdalah. Im nechshev zeh hachana b'Shabbos l'chol. So you're going to put them to bed after Havdalah, but you want to put on the pajamas on Shabbos. Is that a shayla of hachana l'chol? So Reb Moshe answers, Hinei kafi sheyadua li, as far as I can understand, Reb Moshe tells us, Rova yolodim, the b'nei shtayim or b'nei arba, most children who are 2 years old or 4 years old will like tzas yoter, and maybe even a little older than that. Ein choshven lishon klal. They're not planning to go to sleep at all. Ad achar eze zman shah ushtayim. They're not planning to go to sleep for at least an hour or two after they're put into pajamas. Rotzim mitchila v'stovev. You want to run around, the roots, the godim elim, in the pajamas. Ad shemis yaifim, until they get tired, be ashamed to go to sleep. Then it comes out, says Reb Moshe, Shehu derech levishosim begodim elu, kishash time kodem hashem. So it's normal for children to put on their pajamas for an hour or two before they actually go to sleep. We may leleka isur, and therefore there's no problem, no prohibition. Darei bizman shah shasayim kodem Havdalah, hu derech levishosim begodim elu. So this is the normal dress that they wear at this time of the day. So it's not a hachana l'chol, this is their levush at the end of Shabbos. So therefore there's no Shabbat. Now he goes on to say that if you plan to put them to bed immediately after Havdalah, and you're only putting them on pajamas on Shabbos because it's going to save you time later, so then it might be a shayla b'chana l'chol. Okay. Now, the principle that we see from this tshuva is that Reb Moshe Zatzal is trying to tell us that when it comes to making transitions, children need help. Now, adults are not that way. An adult can be involved in let's say, a pleasurable activity. He's working on his computer, or he's doing something else that he enjoys, reading a newspaper, let's say, or magazine, and he glances at his watch, and he sees, oh, it's time for mincha, it's time for Marav. He can slam the magazine shut off the computer, and run out to shul. Or a woman could be reading a magazine or a newspaper. She could look at her watch and say, oh, I have to pick up the kids from the bus stop, I have to meet the kids that are coming home. She'll drop everything and run. So an adult can do that, can make that shift or that transition. Or you can go into sleep. They can close a sefer, jump into bed, and they're out, cold. They don't need any transition. Children, however, are not like that. They need time to transition from one phase to another. And if we're going to expect them to get into pajamas, get into bed, and go to sleep immediately, it's simply not realistic. It's not going to happen. They need time to transition. It's not a bad idea, by the way, even for adults to transition. They can sleep better if they shut off the phone and the computer a little before they plan to go to sleep, and transition slowly into getting into the rhythm of going to sleep. But certainly children need that. They need warnings, they need help, they need transition. So if you expect that you're going to put kids into bed and they're automatically going to go to sleep, then you're barking up the wrong tree, because that's not what Reb Moshe is trying to teach us, that children need transitions. That's Akdama number one. Now, Akdama number two comes from Navi. At the end of Sefer Malachi, the pasuk says as follows: Haviu es kol ha'maiser el beis ha'otzer. The Navi is instructing Klal Yisrael to bring in their trumas and maisros to the Beis Hamikdash. V'yiterep b'veisi, and this will be support for the Kahanim and Leviim that are doing B'ezras Hashem. The Beis Hamikdash, they need support, and the trumas and maisros is what supports the Kahanim and Leviim. Then the pasuk says that B'chanuni na bezos. The Navi is speaking on behalf of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he says, test me. A bechina is a test. Test me with this. Amar Hashem tzavakos. Im lo eftach lachem arupas hashamayim. If I don't open up for you the windows of heaven, varikosi lachem bracha ad b'lidai. Test me if I do not give you brachas from Shemayim that'll be so great that you'll be already saying enough already, unlimited. You'll be getting the bracha. Now, this pasuk is talking about the importance of people contributing their trumas and maisros, separating trumas and maisros, giving it to the Kahanim and Leviim, which is a form of tzedakah. Now, tzedakah is a very good thing, not only supporting the Kahanim and Leviim, which itself is a tremendous accomplishment, but it's good for the individual himself to give tzedakah. As Reb Meir Zatzal used to teach, that giving tzedakah is so important in developing proper midos for a person, that even if he can't afford to give tzedakah, he should practice wanting to give tzedakah. As Reb Meir Zatzal said in one of his shiurim that I had attended many years ago, that a person should train himself to think that he wants to set up a kollel. He wants to support a kollel. He can't do it. It costs thousands of dollars. But he should want to do it. And even the wanting to do it is a form of exercising, as Reb Meir Zatzal called it, the tzedakah muscles. Any muscle gets flabby if it's not exercised. But if you exercise, the muscle gets stronger. In order to strengthen your tzedakah muscles, you have to give tzedakah, and even if you can't, you have to want to give tzedakah. So tzedakah is a wonderful thing. It brings out tremendous midas in a person. It refines the midas of a person. It's beneficial. And yet, the pasuk isn't simply saying, give you tzedakah, give you trumas and ma'aser because it's a good thing for you. But it's adding a promise that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, test me with this. Please test me, you'll see. You'll give the tzedakah, you'll give the trumas and ma'aser. I'm going to give you unlimited brachas. And you'll benefit in a concrete, materialistic way. Now what's the principle we see from this pasuk in Navi? We see that if you want to encourage someone to do something, just explaining to them that it's beneficial, or it's a good idea, or it's helpful, is not always enough. Sometimes you have to translate that into language that the person can understand and see an immediate benefit that they're going to get. The pasuk is saying, if there's an immediate benefit that you're going to get, maybe that will encourage you to do the right thing by bringing your trumas and maasros to the Beis Medrash. Okay, so how do we apply those two principles that were articulated by Reb Moshe, by the Navi, into answering the question that we posed at the outset? How do you keep your kids in bed if you put them to sleep without using that glue? And I wish I knew what brand that glue was that the listener wanted to avoid using, because I don't know of any glue that could do that job so well. So the answer is, number one, you have to plan a transition and help the child make the transition from playing, from running around, from jumping, whatever they're doing, especially young children, to going to sleep. Just putting on pajamas and brushing the teeth isn't always enough of a transition. An excellent thing to do that calms a child down so they're not so worked up is to read them a story. Now, I just want to say parenthetically that I believe that the single most important thing that parents can do to ensure their children's success in school, and they're going to be in school for at least 12, 13 years, by most accounts, the best thing that parents can do, and what parent doesn't want their child to succeed, is to read them bedtime stories. And what does it have to do with success in school? The answer is that when you read bedtime stories to children, any stories, you read to children at night, it's not just entertaining, and it's not just an opportunity to bond with the child. It's teaching them the beauty and the wonder of reading, of the written word. Now, how does that help children to read? So I'll explain to you, and we'll get back to our subject. When children first learn how to read, they read in a very monotonous tone, because they're trying to sound out the word, they're trying to decipher the word, and it comes across in a very monotonous way. And if you ever heard children when they're learning how to read, it's very boring to put you to sleep, because they're reading in a monotonous tone. It's boring to you to listen to, it's boring for them as well. And whatever they're reading, whatever story they're reading, is not very interesting, because they hear it the way they're reading it in a monotonous tone. If they hear the printed word read with expression, as most adults know how to do, then they see a very deeper and richer and more exciting feeling and flavor to what they're reading, the story they're reading. And then they learn how to read that way themselves. When they read with inflection themselves, then it's interesting and enjoyable. And if a child gets to the level where they're going to read for enjoyment, then you're halfway there. If children read for enjoyment, they're going to read well, and if they read well, they're going to excel in every subject. Because most subjects, except for math, is based on reading, and if children can read well and read for enjoyment, they're going to be very successful in school. And what parent doesn't want their child to succeed in school? So, if you can make the time to read bedtime stories to your children, or to tell them stories if they're older, and they like to be told stories, sometimes older children, then you're helping them to transition into a quieter, more relaxed mental state, which makes them more susceptible to going to bed. But that doesn't still answer the sticky question of how do you get them to stay in bed once you put them into bed and not get out of bed, again, without using that glue. So in order to illustrate how this can be done, I want to share a personal example. As many of you know, I have an office here in Lakewood, and I see people here in Lakewood have been doing it for a couple of years. And when I opened the office in Lakewood, some of my friends and colleagues said, "What, business is slow in Brooklyn? What do you have to come to Lakewood for? You don't have enough customers in Brooklyn." And the truth is, I had plenty of business in Brooklyn, plenty of people that wanted to see me in Brooklyn. But the reason I opened an office in Lakewood was very simply that I wanted to spend more time with my grandchildren. I like to be a hands-on Zaidi. So my kids, my grandchildren are all in school, or in play groups, or in nursery during the day. So I needed something to do during the day, so I opened an office in Lakewood. But my main purpose in coming to Lakewood once a week was so I could spend time with my grandchildren. So when they come home from school, I hear about their day, and I can do homework with them, and as I recommended to you, I read them stories and try to help them put them to bed. Now, when I first started doing that, I encountered what everyone else encounters, that they get out of bed. And even if the Zaidi is Meir Wikler, doesn't mean that they don't get out of bed. They get out of bed for me just like they do for anybody else, like they do for you, they jump out of bed. So I realized that when I was bringing a nash, and of course, what Zaidi doesn't come with nash for Zainikulach? I mean, it's de rigueur, it's required, it's in the DNA, I guess, of being a Zaidi. You have to bring nash to your Zainikulach. I was giving them nash when I would come, and then they would put them to bed, and then they would come out of bed. And I said, "Look, you want me to bring you a nash next time?" I already gave them the nash. So I realized it was like, I was trying to buy their good behavior and credit, but I already paid them. So once you're already paid, it's hard to withhold the payment. Then I realized that I was doing things backwards. Giving the nash when I came meant that I had nothing more to hold over them. Now, if you want children to comply with your wishes, and you want them to do something that you think is important, like staying in bed and going to sleep, and it's not something that they feel is important, then they need an incentive. Now, yelling at them, like I did when we started, certainly doesn't work very well. And threatening and punishing them doesn't work very well either. It's just an exercise in frustration for the parents, and it simply doesn't get the job done. So how do you keep the kids in bed after you put them to bed so they stay in bed and go to sleep, which is what you want and what they need? Because they're not going to be able to learn very well the next day if they don't have proper sleep. So the solution I came up with was very simply not giving them the nash when I came, but putting it away and saying they're going to get it tomorrow under the condition that they stay in bed when Zaidi puts them into bed. So I started doing that, and lo and behold, I saw I didn't need the glue. So when I put them to bed, I said, "Now, you know who gets the nash that Zaidi brought tomorrow?" Well, who gets it? Don't we get it? No. Well, only those of you who stay in bed after Zaidi puts you into bed. Now, I have nash for each one of you, and each one of you will get it if you stay in bed after I put you into bed. But if one of you or two of you come out of bed after I put you into bed, then you won't be getting that nash tomorrow. Your brothers and sisters will get it, and they'll be smacking their lips from it. But unfortunately, you won't have it because you didn't stay in bed. Well, it didn't take them very long to realize that it's going to be in their best interest to stay in bed once they're put into bed. They're going to benefit. They see a personal benefit from it, so they're obviously going to cooperate. And it's a small price to pay to give them some incentive, some treat, or some reward for complying with your wishes. And then you can find that you really don't need any glue to keep them in bed. They're going to be motivated themselves to comply because it's in their best interest. So, again, making some kind of transition, doesn't have to be reading a story, but some quiet time, some quiet playtime, before they go to sleep so they can kind of wind down and make the transition from playing and jumping and running to going to sleep. And then offering them some kind of incentive that they would lose if they get out of bed. Then most children don't have to be rocket scientists to figure that it's in their best interest, and they'll comply. And I find that Baruch Hashem has worked very successfully in our home, and I think it can work successfully in your home as well. So let me just tell you that the next Vaad, B'ezras Hashem, will take place in 4 weeks. I think that comes out to May 21st on Sunday, and it's a week before Shloshis Me'ad Bava, so there shouldn't be any chasnas that night. And if anybody, again, wants to submit a question for the Vaad, you can submit that to the email address, again, which is chinuchvad123@gmail.com. I wish you all a good Chodesh. Can we make a minyan for Marv? I think